Hi, and thanks for joining us today here at Lichtsinn Motors, where we're just 1 mile away from the Winnebago and Itasca factory. Today what we're going to do is cover kind of your basic maintenance and service type of items on any of our Sprinter-based coaches. So today we have a Itasca Navion here with us. So the same thing as the Winnebago View. Pretty much everything that we talk about would also apply to the Winnebago Era, as well as the Winnebago Via and Itasca Rayo, which are the Class A, the Era being the Class B. So we're going to stick to a lot of maintenance items. Of course, as we go along, be sure to chat in any questions that you may have, which you can do right in the right-hand side of your browser window. That's really what makes these webcasts so great, is having that interaction of your questions. So again, as those come up, just be sure to ask those and we'll cover those for you as well. So today we have Josh Dam behind the camera. I'm Casey Singlestead, the sales manager here at the dealership, and we're just going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing to note is that obviously the best resource that you all have available to you is, of course, your owner's manuals. Winnebago does a really great job of giving you that organized black bag that has all of your manuals located right inside of that. And essentially you've got a few primary ones. Of course, you have your supplemental manual, which is a very thick manual. And that's basically where Winnebago has combined all of what would have been individual into one bound manual. And then, of course, your separate chassis manual for Mercedes, which will tell you all of those engine maintenance types of things. But then the other great one that you have is your operator's manual. And this is a lot more of the basic 101 RVing types of tips that are located in here. But then the thing to really make note of is that in the back of this manual is where you have an entire section that's dedicated to your maintenance and storage. And towards the back of that section is where you'll find a nice big graph. So this is your coach maintenance chart. And essentially this is going to go through almost every system, appliance, feature that you have inside of your coach and tell you how often you should be checking those and what you need to do in order to inspect those items. So a really good resource that you have right at your fingertips to help you just stay on top of all the maintenance items of a motorhome is located right in your operator's manual. So we're going to go ahead and jump in the cab area here to talk a little bit about your engine battery and some tips with that. All right, so your biggest maintenance item in terms of your chassis battery is really making sure that you're disconnecting it. So here at the dealership, anytime that our coaches are not being used, so anytime that they're parked out on the lot, the easiest thing to do is go ahead and disconnect the batteries after you've done that. And it's super, super simple to do that here in the cab of any of our Mercedes-based products. So the disconnect for your chassis battery or your engine battery, both of those of course are the same thing, is located right here. So you'll see the little red tab, and essentially in order to disconnect that, you simply push that red tab down and pull straight out. And some of them are going to be a little tough to do when you unlatch it, when you disconnect it the first time. Because as you can see, that cable is tucked right behind this panel here. But essentially, you're just going to wiggle that through until you can pull that straight off. Just like that. And so, just with the pull of that tab, your entire chassis and engine battery is disconnected. So, the thing to keep in mind when you do that is that it's best to not disconnect it until after your engine has been turned off for 10 minutes. So in that first 10 minutes after you've stopped your coach, the engine, the whole entire system is still thinking. And so it's best to not disconnect it during that time, because you could potentially set off a code on your dash, a service engine soon light, something of that nature, just from that system being disconnected too early. So again, it's best to let the engine sit for about 10 minutes after you've turned it off before you go ahead and disconnect the battery.
All right, we have a couple questions here on the chassis battery.
Okay.
How do we access the chassis batteries themselves?
So the great thing with the chassis battery is that for pretty much everybody out there, for the most part, your engine or chassis battery is going to be maintenance free, so you don't really have to access it too terribly often. But in order to do that here in the cab, is actually, you'll see these 3 screws here, and you've got a nice little symbol here that's indicating that that's the location of the battery. And so what you'll need to do is pop these three screws off. And this floor mat area will actually then remove itself. It slips right out. And then you'll have about 4 screws and a metal battery cover that'll be covering your battery. And then of course that'll expose the battery itself. So, and it is good to check that on occasion, just to make sure that you don't have any type of corrosion. There's not any dirt or, of course you don't want things building up down there either. So not really something that you have to do on an extremely regular basis, but probably, once a year it might not be a bad idea to go ahead and access that area just to make sure that that everything's clean.
And does the chassis battery have cells that need water?
They do not. So since the chassis or engine battery is maintenance free, essentially what's different about that from your house batteries is the fact that there are no cells that you have to fill water. So that's why it's not as necessary to access it on such a regular basis like it is important to do with your coach batteries or house batteries. Jump starting, if you do get into a situation where you need to jump start your coach, there's a few ways to do that. So obviously you all are probably very familiar with the battery boost that's located here in the cab. So anyone that has a Mercedes-based vehicle will have that, at least if it's a Winnebago product, you will. So what you can do, you can of course use your battery boost, which will tie your house batteries into your chassis batteries to kind of boost your power that way. And then of course the other route is to go ahead and use a jumper pack. And so this is something that we recommend carrying along with you. And we use these really great micro start packs. So as you can see, they're very portable, easy to take with you, basically just in like a 3-ring binder. And so essentially it's everything that you need to jumpstart your coach, just super light, because as you know, some of the jumper packs get really heavy. And so basically all that you do is you hook your jumper cables right into this slot here, and then of course you've got your black and your red. And then you're able to jump start the coach using the post that's underneath the hood, which we can talk about that when we get to all your engine maintenance when we go through that area. Or you could of course physically hook them up to your house batteries and use your battery boost that way as well. But even a pack that's this small, you can use that in order to jump your house batteries or jump your coach. And I know we've had some folks that have asked in the past in terms of how many amps are required in order to jumpstart your RV, and truly it's going to make a difference as to how drained your batteries are as to how many amps you need in order to accomplish that. All right, with that, I think we can move on to the next area here. We're gonna head in the other direction, Josh. All right, so we're gonna talk a little bit about water systems, because obviously that's a big part of the maintenance with your motorhome. So there's a few things that you can do in order to take care of those systems. Now, a pretty common question that we get here is, when folks are maybe getting a little bit of a smell, which is that's caused by your water system, and that's basically from a buildup of bacteria. And so the important thing is to drain out your systems during periods of non-use. And then what you can do is actually sanitize your tanks. So what you're doing is really purifying and sanitizing the lines to control any of that odor that might be caused by your water. Really, this is something that you'll do on an as-needed basis, because it'll depend on the quality of water of where you are as to how often that needs to be done. But realistically, doing that on an annual basis is really probably a good idea, just so that way you can clean your systems out. A lot of folks, this is something that you might do, maybe before you put your coach into storage, so that you've got all that out as it sits over the winter period. Might not be a bad idea to do it again before you get started, just so that way you know you've got clean tanks. So there's really a couple ways that you can do this. There are kits available that's specifically what it's designed to do, is to sanitize your tanks. And so essentially then you're going to have step-by-step instructions right on a kit like this. But really it's something that you can do with just household type of supplies. So what you're gonna do is first you'll need to remove your water filter if you have one, which a lot of you will. And so you're gonna remove your water filter. A lot of them are these 3M types of water filters, which it's good to replace those on an annual basis at a minimum. Most of them are rated for a certain amount of gallons. Like this one, for example, is 2,000 gallons. But again, doing that at least on an annual basis is a good idea. So you're gonna take your water filter out and then replace that with your bypass plug, which hopefully you've held on to, because that's a little important piece to have when you do something like this. So then beyond that, what you're gonna do is you're gonna basically drain everything that you need. If your water pressure is ever reduced as you're using your coach, it could be because of that water filter, and so that would be another good indication to go ahead and replace that as well. But essentially what you're gonna drain everything. And so part of draining all of your water is also draining your water heater. So in order to do that, these might look a little bit different depending on what coach you have and what year it is, but all of your water heaters are gonna have a little plug that needs to be pulled. And as you can see, sometimes they're not in the most convenient places to try to get your fingers in there in order to get that plug out. So they do have these nice little drain plug kits, which essentially gives you a few different bend options to be able to get that wrench in there to really ratchet out that plug to make that a little bit easier. So you're gonna drain out everything from your water filter, or from your water heater, excuse me, which is basically gonna flush out any sediment, any debris that is maybe settled out of your water and into your water heater. And then you wanna let water run through your system, and then you're gonna put that plug back in actually. So in order to actually sanitize out your tanks, if you're gonna do this with household materials, it's really just to be done with bleach. And so that's by using, you're gonna wanna use 1 cup of water and 4 gallons of water, 1 cup of bleach. So that way it's good and diluted, and that's what you're gonna run through your system. The thing with the bleach is that you wanna make sure that you're using unscented bleach, because what you don't want to happen is there's a lot of scented bleaches out there. And if you use those, you're gonna end up with water tanks that smell like lemons or lilacs or whatever scent it is that you happen to have. So you wanna keep it to just your basic standard bleach, no scents, no color, anything of that nature. So you're gonna run that through, you're gonna dilute down the bleach. So 1 cup of bleach to 4 gallons of water, and then that's what you're gonna dump into your tanks. So now, or to get into your tanks. Now, in order to do that, it kind of depends on what type of system you have. So Josh, if you wanna come over here, some of you may have gravity fill, some may not. If you do, it's obviously very easy to simply just grab a funnel and then dump your bleachy water down into your freshwater tank. Now, if you happen to only have the pressurized city fill, we'll take a look at that down here. So that's where, if you're normally filling your tanks by plugging a hose into this type of a fixture, the way to get your bleach in there instead is to not dilute it, but instead take your cup worth of bleach, and you're gonna dump that down into your hose. And then once that's into your hose, you'll hook your hose up and then fill approximately 4 gallons worth of water into your tanks. And so then that way the bleach is the first thing that's going in, followed by the water that's gonna slosh that around. So what's really good is that once you have that bleachy water into your system, is to go ahead and let that sit overnight, or at least for a minimum of, you wanna have that in there for probably 5, maybe up to 10 hours at least, just so that way you've got it good and cleaned, it's gotten around your entire water tank, and it's sat for a little while to make sure that you're getting out any of that odor or bacteria that was in your tank and potentially causing smells. Hopefully you're doing this on a more regular basis, that you're not necessarily getting to that point. But again, it's good to let that sit for a while, just so that way you make sure that you're good and sanitized before you go ahead and dump that out. So the other thing in terms of sanitizing is, of course, your waste tanks. And so we'll take a look right underneath this compartment here. We've got a really good shot of what our waste tanks look like. So this happens to be on a 24G floor plan. As you can see, Winnebago uses basically sonar technology with their sensors. So their sensors are mounted to the outside of your tank so that you don't have the probes that are drilled through the tanks. Sometimes if you do have inaccurate readings, that may simply just be from basically from things accumulating on the sides of the sidewalls of your tanks. So at that point, it's good to go ahead and sanitize out your waste tanks and basically clean out those sidewalls. Now, in order to do that, you're actually going to use you're going to use soapy bleach water instead. So if you take about 5 gallons of water, a cup of bleach, and then adding some soap, what you're going to do is you're going to take that mixture and dump that down into your tank. So in order to get that into your holding tanks, you're going to put that down the toilet, down the shower drain, down the sink drains, all of those areas so that it gets in through your P-traps and down into your holding tanks. So you want that about 5 gallons worth of that soapy bleach water in both your gray tank as well as your black tank. So you're going to do that process twice. Once for down your toilet and the others for down your shower and sink drains. And then really the best thing to do is just go ahead and go for a ride or go for a drive. And that'll basically get that solution and it'll slosh that around throughout your holding tanks. So that way you can make sure that you're cleaning the sidewalls of those tanks before you drain that out. Let's see here. Just the last minute item in terms of just a maintenance item that sometimes is easily overlooked but is fairly inexpensive is just by simply replacing the washers that are on your water fittings. So sometimes you'll develop, whether it's drips from faucets or if your flow is changing, things of that nature, and it could just be that you need to change out one of these washers. And so it's not a bad idea to carry a little pad of these around with you, just so that way as you need it to replace those out of your faucets, you can do that. Pretty inexpensive little item, but again, something that could otherwise be easily overlooked. So we'll come around to the passenger side and talk a little bit about generator maintenance. So generators are going to vary a little bit depending on what happens to be on your coach. With any of our Sprinter coaches, you're basically looking at either having an LP or a diesel generator. Now, of course, in terms of your maintenance items, your primary thing is, of course, just going to be checking your oil on occasion, which is simply done right from where you fill your oil. On the opposite side of this will be your dipstick, where you can check where your level's at on that to make sure that that's good. The other thing is really just a visual inspection to, again, as we talked about with the engine battery, to make sure that you don't have any debris, whether that's from, of course, animals, insects, birds, those types of things, and or just dirt. Because things like that, if that piles up in your generator, I mean, that's really a risk factor in terms of, potentially causing a fire or damage to your generator, which could end up being very spendy. So again, just doing that visual inspection to make sure that all that is clean. The other item, the best and most important thing that you can do for your generator is exercising it. So in terms of exercising your generator, when we talk about that, it is extremely important that you exercise your generator on a monthly basis. So now if you look at your owner's manual, the recommendation from that is going to be that you exercise that for a minimum of 2 hours every month under some type of load. So turn on some of your lights, maybe the air conditioning, some of those appliances and features that you have inside of your motorhome. You're going to turn those on and then exercise your generator. So basically what that's doing is that's making sure that you've got fresh fuel that's pumping through your lines, making sure that everything's working properly, that that again, just avoiding having a larger ticket expense item down the road by having that exercising. Of course, the other piece of the generator maintenance is, of course, the intervals at which you should change out the oil as well as the filter. So with your LP, your very first oil change is going to be at 20 hours. If you happen to be someone that has a gas generator, which wouldn't necessarily be on our View Navions, Via Rayos, and Eras, but that's also at 20 hours. And then everything after that is going to come every 6 months or 150 hours is how frequently you should be changing that. Now, if you're someone that really does not use the generator very often, it's still super important to make sure that you're changing out the oil and filter on that, so that way you've got a fresh one in there. So you want to make sure at an absolute minimum that you're doing it on an annual basis if you're not following the 6 month or 150 hour interval. If you happen to have a diesel generator, then you're going to change it out every 50 hours for your initial. After that is going to go to 6 months or 250 hours. So not quite as frequent with the diesel.
All right, we have a question here about the generator. Can you start the generator without the batteries?
So your generator is what powers that. In other words, how you start that is off of your house or your coach batteries. So you'll need to have your batteries installed. So the biggest thing is that if you do remove the batteries when you winterize, that's what'll make it more tricky for you to exercise your generator, because you will need to have that power in order to start the gen. So depending on how long you have that stored for over the winter, it may be important for you to at least set those batteries back in there so that you can run the generator at least at some point during that storage period. But yes, you do have to have the house batteries or coach batteries installed in order to start your generator.
Speaking of storage, should you change the oil before storage or after winter, or after it's been stored for a while?
So this probably really applies to changing the oil on generator or changing the oil on your engine. And either way, I mean, it's really a personal preference thing. I know here, in speaking with the technicians that we have here at our dealership, the general recommendation is to basically start off your year on a fresh oil and fresh filter. So generally that would be after you're pulling your coach out of storage to go ahead and change that lube oil filter at that point. Another item, just in terms of something that a lot of our customers like having just to make things easier to maintain, are these insect screens that you can use over, basically you can put that over furnace inlets. There's ones that are made for the water heater as well. They come in all different shapes and sizes. We do recommend using the bigger square size versus the smaller, just so that way it's not quite as constricting for the furnace if you're going to apply something like this. But basically that'll just cover up the holes that are basically in the side of your coach for those the furnace, so that way you don't have any insects that find their way into something like that, which again could create a much larger job than what you'd like to deal with. So next we're going to talk a little bit about tires, because there's a few different things to keep in mind with tires. One of our really popular accessories that we offer here are our tire covers. Now this is a really great way to basically keep your tires out of, keep them from being exposed to UV rays, which is essentially the most damaging thing to your tires and the sidewalls of your tires. Typically, anyone's going to have to replace their tires because the sidewalls are starting to weather check before your tread ever goes. So a great way to help protect that, to make sure that you can get the most life out of your tires, is by using tire covers. Now the thing to keep in mind with that, if you're going to use tire covers, is to not allow moisture to get in there. So if you do happen to be in an area where you've had some rain, of course some morning dew can cause things like that, it's a good idea to let those tire covers dry out, at least on occasion if you're parked somewhere for a longer period of time. Just so that way you're not trapping that moisture that can cause mold or mildew or anything like that that may hurt your tires or the tire covers themselves. But the other thing that we talk a lot about is tire pressure, specifically on our Sprinter-based coaches, because sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult. So the thing with that is that obviously checking your tire pressure is something that's very important. However, when you've got your stainless steel wheel liners, sometimes it can be difficult to get to those valves. So really the best thing that you can do is actually to pop the cover off. Now, this particular cover does have screws that are holding it in. Some of them do not. Some of them are simply held in by pressure. But regardless, it's not a bad idea to have a tool that looks similar to this. So basically you've got a little crowbar on one end and then a rubber mallet on the other. And so that way, once you've removed your screws, you can essentially get that in between the wheel and then the liner, so that way you can apply some pressure to pop that out. And they do come out very easily, which is then going to expose those valve stems so that it's easier for you to check the pressure in those. Now regardless, it's probably a good idea to have a couple different gauges. Because the valve stems are at very different angles, depending on if you're on the front tires. If you're looking at the rear tires, you've got the inner dual as well as the outer dual to consider. And so typically, especially when you're checking the outer dual, sometimes it's easier to have more of this straight angle to be able to access that valve stem. And then of course on most of our tires, this is the most common type of tire gauge that you see. But it can be very nice to have both of those accessible to you. Now, of course, the other option is to add valve stem extensions. And so basically what you'd be doing is changing out what comes as rubber valve stems to be metal valve stems instead, which you would also need to do if you plan on adding any type of accessory, which we're going to talk about here shortly. So basically these can be added. In one kit, you're going to have valve stems that come for your front tires, the inner dual as well as the outer dual, or excuse me, these are just for the rear tires. So there's 4 extensions in there total. And basically that's going to allow you to extend those out through the wheel liner, so that way it's a lot easier to check those with just a standard tire gauge. So that's one thing that you can do, which is also something that's required if you're going to add an accessory, like a tire minder, for example. So this is something that you can hook up that'll actually monitor your tire pressure for you. So this will actually attach to your metal valve stems, and then you get this nice little control that goes right up on your dash, and that'll tell you exactly where your pressures are at on all of your tires. And the great thing with this is that you can actually also add it if you are towing a vehicle. You can add that to your tow vehicle as well, so that way it monitors not only the tire pressure on your RV, but also on the car that you're dragging behind as well. So that can be a nice accessory if you're going to do that. Part of that is also doing the metal valve stems. In terms of pressure recommendations, the best place to find that is right in the front of your black bag or on the inside of your driver's door. You'll have a label there that'll tell you exactly what the tire pressure should be at. And now what you'll find is that may actually vary from what the recommendation is from the tire manufacturer. The tire manufacturer will come up with a recommendation as to what the tire pressure should be. However, Winnebago then bases what they recommend your tire pressure to be once the coach is actually built and the weight that's actually over those tires. And so those are the tire pressure recommendations that you're going to want to use. So again, there's 2 locations to find that, and one of which is right in the front of your black bag. There will be a yellow sticker that shows all of your tire pressures, or on the side of the driver's door. Right in that opening, you'll have that sticker as well. Last thing in terms of tire pressure is really, we do a lot of nitro ads here at our dealership. So there's a lot of folks that are starting to add nitro to their tires, which is what you'd find on any NASCAR vehicle. They all have nitrogen in their tires. And what that does is it maintains a constant tire pressure. So particularly here in the Midwest, a lot of times now in the winter, we have a lot of our tire pressure gauges that are going off on our dashes. It's because of that change in temperature. You have the same thing, of course, when you change elevations, that your tire pressure changes. With nitro, that no longer happens. And so what that does is, beyond maintaining a constant tire pressure, it also creates better wear for your tires because that pressure isn't changing. And so then, of course, you can get a little bit more life out of your tires as well, which is always a great thing to do. So I think that pretty much covers tires. Now we'll move on to a few other items to note. So one of the things in terms of maintaining your sidewalls, obviously waxing your sidewalls is one of the biggest things, particularly for those of you with full body paint. Waxing your sidewalls is what's going to maintain that outer clear coat that's on that full body paint. For those of you who have the fiberglass with the graphics or decals, wax is extremely important because, again, that's protecting the outer coating that's on your the gel coat that's on the fiberglass, and then that also is what protects your decals themselves and keeps them from fading or peeling or cracking, things like that can happen from the sun. So beyond waxing it, which should happen at least a couple times a year, also just, of course, your regular washing of the exterior of your coach. The best thing to be able to have on hand is you need to make sure that you have a very soft bristled brush, so that way you're not causing any type of scratches as you're cleaning. And then, of course, it's made really easy when you have a pole that extends, because that literally makes it super easy to be able to reach the entire side of the motorhome without any problem. And so you can essentially extend that brush up so that you can reach the entire motorhome very easily to be able to clean those sidewalls. Now beyond that, the other thing that you might use your brush for is also with cleaning your awning. Now with awning maintenance, really the awning needing to be cleaned really shouldn't happen on that regular of a basis. The biggest thing with maintaining your awning is making sure that when you store your awning, that it is dry. So we have a lot of pre-owned coaches that come in on trade, that when you roll that awning out, you can tell that it still has moisture in there. A lot of times you get a not so pleasant smell of mold and mildew that comes from that as well. And that is caused from that awning being rolled back in when it's raining. Now, of course, it's probably a pretty common thing. A lot of us are probably panicking to get our awnings rolled back in once the rain starts because there's bad weather coming. But the important item is to make sure that you take it back out afterwards to dry that out. It doesn't have to be dry instantly when you put it in. But just keeping in mind that if you did roll that up when there was moisture on it, even if that's just from morning dew and not necessarily from a rain, it's important to take that back out, let it dry, so that way you don't cause any of that mold or mildew and that smell that comes with it. So we'll talk a little bit in terms of seals. Now there's a lot of seals to maintain on a motorhome because you've got seals around your compartment doors, seals around your windows, seals around the entry door, your slide rooms, all of that has seals. So now an important thing is to basically keep those from drying out. And a really great product to use for that is this Aero 303. This is something that we use a lot at our dealership on all of those seals, even things like your roof vents. Sometimes you may notice that your roof vents start to stick and you can't get them open quite as easily. That's because those seals are drying out. So a great thing to do is to use an application like this and simply apply that by spraying that to your seals just to keep those moist, so that way you don't have any of that cracking. Sometimes the seals that go around the outer edge of your window will start to shrink over time, so it's good to keep those good and lubricated with a product, something similar to that. And like I said, we highly recommend the Aero 303 here at our dealership. That's something that we use a lot. Tip out windows are another one that can become similar to vents where it might be difficult to open them at first. If you have those jalousie style of windows, same thing. Just by simply applying something to that to keep that rubber soft, keep it pliable, that'll prolong its life so that you don't have to replace those seals as often. Now, in speaking of other seals, of course, another really important one is, of course, your roof seal. So the sealant that's on your roof should be inspected at a minimum of twice a year, which is something that we do complimentary here at our dealership. Anytime that you happen to be in the area, if you bring your coach in for service, we always do a complimentary inspection of your roof sealants. That's something that is a very minor thing to stay on top of, but can cause major damage if you don't keep that inspected and in good condition. So the biggest thing with that is that Winnebago uses self-leveling sealant on the roof. So basically anywhere where your roof meets your sidewalls and anywhere, and of course your front and rear caps, and then anything that goes through your roof. So your vent covers, your TV antenna, if you have a satellite dish, all of that will have this self-leveling sealant on it. Now the important thing is that if you need to replace that sealant, it is very important that you remove that sealant before replacing it versus just layering on a new section of self-leveling sealant. The other important item is that you use the actual correct type of sealant. Now there's a lot of different sealants that are available at hardware stores. However, it'll last just about as long as what it took you to clean it off. So it's really important that you use the self-leveling so that way it stays longer. And again, just making sure that you have that inspected on a regular basis. Because the problem is that without having that sealant inspected, what that eventually leads to, of course, is leaking problems. Which sometimes the first time that we spot that is because there's a lot of folks that have the polypropylene ceilings, which essentially is more of that carpet look that's on the roof of your coach. And so then you get a nice little stain that comes from that. And so if that's the first time that you notice the fact that you have a leaking problem, there is a really great product to get rid of that stain once you've fixed the leak, of course. We use this a lot here at our dealership if we are repairing any stains that have happened from around skylights or roof vents or anything of that nature, and it's called Instagon. So this is a really good way to maintain that polypropylene sealing that you have. It's also just a really good stain remover, but that's the most common thing that it's used for, is removing those water stains from when a sealant has basically failed and caused a water leak. Now, on the flip side of that, there's also quite a few areas where you have a urethane-based sealant. And so this is something that you can really clean up with a solvent instead. You don't have to completely remove it. You can layer this on top of an old one. So typically your urethane sealants are maybe clear or white in color. And then you can pick up basically a new tube of sealant, and you can go over top of the old rather than having to completely clean it off like what you absolutely need to do on the roof with the self-leveling sealant. Let's see, detectors, of course, are another important thing to make sure that you're maintaining. A good rule of thumb on smoke detectors as well as carbon monoxide detectors is to basically replace your batteries when you reset your clock. So that guarantees you that twice a year you're going to have fresh batteries in these detectors. So that way you know that that's never something that'll die. That's an important thing to make sure is functioning. The LP detector, of course, is the other detector that's in your motorhome. And so now these are mounted in all kinds of different places. With your smoke detector, that's generally going to be somewhere in the galley. Your carbon monoxide is typically somewhere that's in the bedroom area. Of course, both of those are on the roof. Your LB detector, on the other hand, will be lower to the floor. And your way of testing that, of course, is that each one has a little button that's located right on it that says test or mute. And so simply by pushing that button, you'll hear a little chirp. And that's what will tell you that that LP detector is still working properly. If you don't get that chirp, that's when you need to have something inspected to make sure that that's functioning. All right, we're gonna go ahead and hop inside the coach and talk a little bit about your house batteries or coach batteries. So now for most of you, these are gonna be located right in your step well. It's gonna be a little bit different for those of you driving Eras because your coach batteries in an Era are also maintenance free, just like the chassis battery that we talked about. So with the house battery, the important thing for the maintenance of these is, of course, the water levels that are on it and that visual inspection like we talked about with your water heater as well as your generator. So what we do here at our dealership for maintaining our batteries, we do remove them during the winter period when we are storing the motorhome, so that way we don't have to worry about those water levels. We also periodically charge them as well, just to make sure that they're not dropping too low. Batteries are something that can be very expensive to replace, so anything that we can do to help to maintain those, of course, is in our benefit. So to check the water, you're simply going to pop off these caps. As you can see, there's two that it's on each battery. Those will pop right off, and you can verify that that water level is good. Of course, if you're refilling that, you want to make sure that you're using distilled water. Removing them in the winter time basically allows you to keep a closer eye on those water levels and then keep those batteries in a controlled temperature. And again, it allows you to have the opportunity to charge them a couple times throughout the winter. So basically, if you have a fully charged, good condition battery that can sit outside, it's not a problem. You can certainly leave them in over the winter. It's just safer to bring them inside. And then the other thing, of course, is the surfaces, to make sure that it's clean. And so what you're inspecting for there is any dirt, and then avoiding any corrosion, because it's fairly common for corrosion to start building up essentially where your connections are and then around your water terminals. And so you want to make sure that those are good and clean, and keep those just avoiding any form of corrosion, really, so that you can maximize the use of your batteries. Now, the other thing that you can do is, of course, to test your actual battery levels. There's these wonderful little tools out there that look similar to this that basically allows you to hook straight up to your battery terminals, and it'll give you an exact reading of where your battery level is at. So that's an easy way to kind of keep an eye on that, particularly during times of storage, because of course your coach batteries will be charging anytime that you're plugged in, anytime your engine is running. That'll help to maintain that battery level. that's kind of the basics on batteries. So we'll go ahead and head around to the engine. All right, so there's a few things here in the under the hood that are important to take note of. Of course, right here is where you have your cabin air filter. This is something, it's very easy to just pop this out to be able to inspect that. Now, this is not something that you can clean. Anytime this gets dirty, you're just simply going to replace it. But it's super easy to see that, and it comes in and out really easily as well. So a pretty easy item in terms of maintenance. Of course, coolant levels is something that you can visually inspect. Just below that is also the location of the DEF. Now, of course, not everyone's going to have DEF as something that you need to maintain. Some of you will have it here underneath the hood. Others may have it in the storage compartment that's just outside of the entry door. Now, there's really no maintenance required with the DEF. There's no dipstick in order to check the oil. Really what you're going to go off of is the warning light that will come up on your dash in terms of when that's used. And so the biggest recommendation is to use all of the fluid that's in the tank versus topping it off on occasion. Just so that way you know that you've got fresh DEF. You're not going to be mixing old DEF with new DEF. So just use all of that until your warning symbols come on. And you've got two different series of warning lights that'll come on. The first of which I believe is just an amber yellow light that'll come on. It'll flash at you to say that it's starting to get low. So that's a time that you can start to think about filling it. Now, if you allow it to continue to get even lower than that, that's when you'll have a red warning light that will come on instead, and that will stay on versus come on and turn off like the yellow one did. And that's when it's really important for you to find DEF and refill the tank. But basically, I believe the tank's just a couple gallons. It's something that you don't have to fill very often. I believe the fuel economy, if you will, of DEF is you get 1,700 miles to the gallon with that. So it's not something you have to fill very often. Oil level, of course, is simply checked with the dipstick, and so you've got that right down here is what will allow you to check that. Now, the biggest thing in terms of changing your oil and filter is making sure that you use an approved oil. And so this is one example. There's also Mobile One has another one that will work for you. And what you're looking for is right on the back. It'll have where it has the specifications. That's where you'll make sure that it has the correct Mercedes certification, so that way you can use it. But this is the synthetic oil that we use here at the dealership anytime we're changing oil. And then, of course, the Mercedes-Benz oil filter as well. Transmission fluid is a little bit different on the Sprinters, as that's not something that you have a dipstick available to you to check, and that's on purpose. It's intentional that Mercedes wants you, if there's something that's necessary with the transmission, they want you to take that to a certified service location in order to do that. Mercedes has a really great website to use to find Sprinter certified dealer or service locations, excuse me, where virtually all that you have to do is type in the zip code wherever you happen to be traveling, and it'll give you the closest service locations that are certified to work on the Sprinter chassis. Because as you know, not every Mercedes dealership can necessarily service the Sprinter. So it's a really great website to use. It's simply the dealer locator that's a part of their the Mercedes website.
And what's a good source for obtaining parts related to the Sprinter? It's like if you need the air filter.
Sure. So a lot of this are things that we'll carry here at our dealership, because we do replace things like that on a regular basis. But otherwise, of course, Mercedes themselves, that's where all of that's basically coming from. If you order it through our dealership, that's where it originally comes from when we ship it to you. So you'll have our parts department as a resource, as well as Mercedes locations. So again, it'd be any of those Sprinter, the Sprinter certified locations will also have filters and things like that that you would need in order to change the oil. Continuing on, just in terms of things that are here in your engine compartment, of course, your standard washer fluid that you can fill, that's easy to visually inspect. And then this is the access that I was talking about earlier in terms of if you need to jump start your engine battery. You get a nice little easy access to the positive port on that. So basically you'll hook up your positive end here, and then you're just going to want to ground with your black end, whether that's on any piece of metal. There's another little probe that's located right on this side of the engine compartment where you can plug that into as well in order to ground that jumper pack. Otherwise, of course, the important thing is, again, just like what we talked about with the generator, that interval in which you change the oil and filter. And so there's a few different items with the engine maintenance on the Sprinter to keep in mind. So you've got your engine oil and your engine filter, is what we talked about earlier. Now that's going to be done every 20,000 miles or every 2 years. Now this is on the 2014 chassis or newer. And your way to determine which chassis you have is by looking at your VIN number. That's what will indicate that for you. Now if you have a coach that's a 2005 to 2013 and some of our 2014s, the rotation on that instead is every 10,000 miles or every 2 years. Now our dealership, we recommend changing your oil on an annual basis, particularly if you store it. So again, when you take it out of storage, that's a good time for you to change that. Otherwise, the other items, of course, you have your fuel filter, which also gets changed every 20,000 miles or 2 years. Your engine air filter every 60,000 miles. And then that cabin air filter that we talked about, the general rotation on that is every 30,000 miles or every 3 years. And I think that covers most of that.
All right, we do have one question here about fuel. Can more than 5% biodiesel fuel be used in the Sprinters without impacting the warranty?
So this is something that is referenced in your manuals. It'll talk about the biodiesel fuel. It's always recommended that you use the ultra low sulfur diesel, I believe is what they refer to that as. And so basically that's biodiesel up to 5%. And so that's really what's recommended by Mercedes, is to not use anything above that. Now, this is something that's been a pretty hot topic recently, particularly here in the Midwest. Minnesota specifically is one where Mercedes released a specific handout on that, which is basically stating, that's here in the Midwest, we use a lot of corn in order to make our fuel, and so then we do have more, and so there's a lot of times that you'll find B20, and so that's any time that your biodiesel is anywhere from 5 to 20%. It'll be labeled with B20. And so the recommendation is to make sure that you can use that. However, you want to fill up with the ultra low sulfur diesel as much as possible. And then you want to regularly monitor your engine oil, the level that's on that. And of course you absolutely want to follow the rotations that we talked about in terms of taking care of that engine oil and filter on a regular basis if you are ever in areas that you're using the B20 fuel instead. Another thing to make sure that you're doing if you're using the B20 fuel is to make sure that you're limiting the time that your engine spends idling. So you want to keep that below 5 minutes if at all possible. Again, just to help with that fuel consumption. And then if you don't plan on driving your vehicle for a while, you'll want to make sure that you've got the ultra low sulfur diesel in there versus the B20 levels. So I guess at the end of the day, which is stated right in your manual, that it's recommended that you only use the ultra low sulfur diesel. However, there are exceptions to that. You can use the B20, the diesel that's labeled as B20, you just want to do that sparingly. So typically if you're traveling through an area, you might need to fill up with that maybe a couple times before you're to an area where you'll have the ultra low sulfur diesel, and then you'll want to make sure that you're filling it with that instead. But any other questions out there, Josh? All right, well, I think that takes care of things here today. If there's ever anything that you'd like more detail on, just be sure to let us know. We're happy to take recommendations in terms of future webcasts. We can also do live walkthroughs that are very similar to this on any of our in-stock motorhomes that we have here at our dealership. With any of our sales consultants can take care of that for you as well. Otherwise, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next month.